Kobolds are dragons, gnolls are demons, and lizard folk are elementals? Before I take this posting and cut up to fix this monster manual, let's talk about monsters and people. My name is James. I've been a dungeon master for 25 years, and on this channel I talk about the things that I plan and plot for my tabletop role-playing games. If you like that kind of content, then there's buttons down there for like and subscribe. I appreciate the support. There have been a lot of channels covering the removal of the orc from this book, and like everybody else, I had opinions, and I was getting a little pissy about it until I picked it up. And I'm kind of fine with it, because it turns out I got a lot of orcs. I got guard orcs, I got berserker orcs, non-combatant orcs, druid orcs, priest orcs, cultist orcs, assassin orcs, scout orcs. I got a lot of orcs. All I have to do to make them orcs is give them dash as a bonus action. If they drop to 0 hit points, they take another hit to die, and they all have dark vision. I got myself a proper horde. Because when I play orcs, I need a lot of different kinds of orcs. This fits my playstyle perfectly. I'm honestly more annoyed that the lizard folk is an elemental and the Sphinx is turning more and more into just a winged cat rather than the man-eating child of Echidna and Typhon. Because it's an argument on the internet, and we're human beings. People seem to want it to be one of two sides. Either the orc is a person or the orc is a monster. And even Hasbro seems to want to be crystal clear on where different species in the monster manual falls. But I'm not sure that there is a clean dividing line between people and monsters. As a dungeon master and a player before that, my players and I have killed at least as many evil humans, dwarves, and elves out looking to conquer the world as we have monsters that are just out looking for something to eat. Maybe I'm missing something, but I cannot conceive of a reason to say these bipedal creatures are monsters, while these bipedal creatures are people, unless you're trying to satisfy some crazed parent that has come down and said, "Oh my God, you're killing people. You all are evil." Meanwhile, that same person would go see the next John Wick film and not bat an eye at how many people he kills. Well, he's an actor and he's killing evil people. Wait, what? You're so close. The connection is right there and you're missing it. If a lion gets a hold of a gazelle, that doesn't make the lion a monster. If the lion gets hold of a person, still doesn't make the lion a monster. To the lion, there's no difference between a gazelle and a person. We are both meat, and it can't survive any other way. But Lady Bathory was a real person, and a monster. At least as monstrous as the Sphinx or a ghoul. So if a person can be a monster, then, well, what makes a monster a monster? The dictionary has a definition, but it doesn't really work for our hobby, because the things that it would consider a monster are sometimes friendly. And some of the worst, most monstrous things in our game are people. Strahd, Vecna, Lord Soth, Manchun, Zastam, we're all human. Whatever the fantasy RPG is that you're playing, chances are that it is considered an undeniable good for the characters to go and fight whatever monster is involved in the adventure. And if that expectation meets up with realism and modern morality and ethics, it might be difficult for the players to set aside who they actually are and put themselves in the mindset of adventurers that are fighting for their own survival, the survival of their people, their culture, and to make hard, difficult, uncomfortable decisions. We were fighting a dragon with lizard folk that were taking townsfolk and feeding it to a dragon. And we defeated it, and then for some reason in the last room, the dungeon master put a room with a lizard folk mother and their eggs. What are we supposed to do with the innocents? Chances are that one player is going to want to smash the eggs and kill the mother without giving it a second thought. But it's also possible that some of the players start thinking about the ramifications of what happens if you let that mother live and she raises these young on stories of dwarves and elves and humans that came in and slaughtered all their kin. Would my character feel some sort of guilt by proxy for the eventual deaths that might be caused from that? And if we kill the mother, then we're just sentencing the young to a longer, crueler death. What do we do with them? Could we, take them ourselves? Would the villagers take them in? For some people, these aren't monsters anymore. They have families, they have children, and if those children aren't snarling and biting, then are they evil from birth? The answer that I hear when this problem is posed is don't use humanoids as nameless, faceless evil, stormtroopers. Instead, use slimes, undead, insect people, lizard people, dragons as whatever generic evil you need for a minion. And if you are going to have a human as your main evil bad guy, then go full stereotypically evil. Dark robes, skulls, evil curses, threats against the innocent. And that goes for things like werewolves, kobolds, and goblins, etc. If killing humanoids in the game is going to bother your players, they're unlikely to care about Hasbro's classification of lizard folk as elementals. They need the villain to be unapologetically evil. A monster. In like a PG-13 Voldemort or Sauron kind of way. Don't go crazy and start describing war crimes or like Hannibal Lecter or something and make your players uncomfortable. If the villain can be redeemed, that's an interesting story, but a complex one. And not just morally. What happens if the players fail to redeem the villain and they have to kill them? Will they feel like they succeeded or will they feel like they failed? Use these other non-humanish creatures as your nameless, faceless evil strikes me as odd advice. Why couldn't an insect be considered a person? If aliens came down and they were insects, would we consider them a person? We haven't met aliens yet, so why are you worried about it? Because you haven't met an orc yet either. The orc is identified with because the description that Tolkien used to make the orc is also the description that people use for another group of people. And that description was dehumanizing. And that's part of a process by which humans make it easier for us to do barbaric things to one another. And despite attempts to re-illustrate, redesign, reimagine the orc, they still look human enough that people can see themselves in the orc. We imagine that their families and their children look something like ours, and they must therefore have a humanish perspective. What about something that doesn't look like us? Thrycreen, Flormix, Talani Mass, the Gorn. Because these things look monstrous, they don't get to be people?
Fascinating. A pattern is developing.
I don't have a problem with orcs, goblins, lizardfolk, any of these things being evil from birth in a fantasy world. Fantasy takes and simplifies our harsh world to inspire, teach, and entertain. And if as a player, I can trust that you as a dungeon master do not see these creatures as some sort of stand-in for a real group of people, then cool. Pass my character their sword and pass me another piece of pizza. But if you want me to engage in the exercise of determining who is morally a person and who isn't, then it's going to have to be about something more than this creature doesn't have your phylotype. They need to be more complex than just other human stand-ins. Current D&D versions of dwarves, elves, gnomes, halflings, Goliaths, these kind of things. But still be people. They need to be sapient and sentient, the ability to understand consequences and make choices, be a part of society, and have some sort of moral and ethical understanding that I can come to understand, even if at the end of it I disagree and we end up still enemies in a role-playing sense. This is Whitney. You might have heard her snoring in my lap. She's a little small for a beagle at 13 pounds. She's about 6 kilos. She has a S-rank sense of smell. She can run faster than any human can, and she can see better than we can in the dark. She's also got a problem-solving intelligence. The skin of a grape, onions, or garlic might kill her outright, and while she is a carnivore, her ancestors probably survived more as scavengers. She's going back in my lap now. Now imagine in a fantasy world, a creature like my beagle was forced by magic or circumstances or something to evolve. Let's call them beaglekin. Some of their traits from their hound ancestors would carry along, like their ability to see in the dark. That's iconic to many animals, so let's carry that over. But I don't like so many species having dark vision, so we're going to make this low light vision. Dogs, especially beagles, have a powerful sense of smell. They can tell when we are sick, angry, or depressed through chemical changes on our breath and through our sweat. So I could give them advantage on survival, insight, perception, or I could wrap that all up in a +2 to wisdom. Then there's her strength. She's pretty small for a beagle, but she still has a lot of pull on a leash, especially if she sees a squirrel, a bird, a person on a bike, another dog, basically anything that's moving. But even then, it's unlikely that any humanoid descendants of her would end up being as strong as like a human or a dwarf. So -2 to strength. Is that bioessentialism? No, she's not human. Our last common ancestor was over 100 million years ago. She is a totally different species. Maybe if I was to say that Labradorians have a -2 to intelligence and beaglekin have a +2 to intelligence, there would be a case to be made, but there's got to be a line drawn somewhere that dictates where one species divided from the other one. Are you putting that at dogs? Or are you putting it at all Kennedy? What about our culture? Our language would probably be scent-driven and a lot of non-visual cues, and that could make conversing with a non-scent-driven species like humans difficult. I could say that that is a -2 to charisma, but charisma changes are across the board, even to other beaglekin. So I'd rather say disadvantage on intimidation and persuasion. While it could be interesting and funny in a story sense to explain why a Beagle King can order white wine in a tavern but would drop dead after a glass of red wine, there's not enough there, and we need something more for story and world-building opportunities. I don't think that we usually consider an animal like a beagle as an omnivore. They are, but like a bear, we think of them as carnivores. So in our fantasy world, the beaglekin evolved from a carnivorous group of pack hounds. That carnivorous thing means that they probably never developed farming. You could say that they start shepherding herds, but even that doesn't mean that you stay put when the weather changes. You only start putting down roots when you need to be there the next spring to plant new crops. So they continue to follow the natural migration patterns of the herds that they hunt, until humans come along and put down roots and start farming on land where their herds used to roam. And now they're going to end up in conflict. We don't care about the carrots, potatoes, wheat, rye, and all that stuff you're growing over there, but those chickens, those look pretty tasty. And the beaglekin would have trouble understanding culturally why they can't just take it. They don't have fences, walls, and towns in their culture. And the idea of owning an animal might be alien to them. It's not even universal to all humans. We, the pack, killed it. It's no longer prey, it's now food. If you wanted it, you should have killed it. Would a human that grew up in beaglekin culture have some sort of beaglekin background? Maybe some of it, but they probably always have problems with the language, because if you don't have enough scent receptors, there's nothing you can do about the ability to communicate during scents and maybe picking up non-visual clues. What about a beaglekin raised in a human culture? Sure, they'd have some of it again, but they probably also always have problems with the amount of scents like vanilla, orange peel, and lavender that humans love to drench themselves in. The beaglekin in a fantasy world is a person. It has intelligence, sapience, and sentience. It can make choices. It has agency, but it has a very different perspective from humans. It would have difficulty with the two cultures. What happens when the beaglekin's normal prey gets sick and they all die off? The beaglekin, for survival, will now have to take the chickens. The farmers will, of course, object. A fight ensues. A farmer dies. And the farmers are obviously going to be upset about that. You killed him over a chicken? You're a bunch of monsters. But for the beaglekin, it is a matter of survival. You can eat all the corn and carrots and wheat and all the other stuff you grow. We need these chickens. Otherwise, our families are going to starve to death. That would make a complicated story in a gritty, realistic world that's complex. But maybe your players just want to play the beaglekin for the floppy ears and the tail. They don't want to deal with all the complexities of this. They don't want to deal with the NPCs being mad at them because some group of beaglekin stole a chicken. If a player like that were to play something like a beaglekin, or an orc, or a goblin, then it stops being its own individual unique species and it becomes something more akin to like a video game skin. And it's hard to walk that back. If the players want something that is lighthearted fantasy fun, where the character species are just a skin that they put over themselves so that they can draw their character differently, then do that. If the players want something that is more complex, more gritty realism, then go right ahead. But if you as a dungeon master want this species to be more complex and more interesting, you may have to hold off on it or make it alien and weird enough that the players have difficulty understanding how they might go about playing that so that they don't want to play that. Complex doesn't mean better, it just means different. I'm aware that part of the discussion is about real-world human issues, things that people have done and continue to do to one another. And that since many of the sources of our fantasy worlds come from things in the real world, legends and myths, and what people thought of other people, that there is baggage that is handed down from A to B to C. And the people upon whom the original source material is based have some legitimate grievances. Can you sit down at a table and say, we are aware that the D&D orc was heavily based on Tolkien's orc, and that Tolkien, in a letter, said some distasteful things comparing his vision of an orc to a real-world group of people. But Tolkien did not invent and does not own orc. The orc was originally a word in an Anglo-Saxon poem, and no one is sure whether that word referenced some sort of ghoulish creature, some sort of a demon, or the god Pluto. Since no one knows what it means, and since word and languages can change, can we all agree that this word, no longer means anything in the real world, but is a reference to a creature that exists in a fantasy world that is filled with elves, dwarves, wizards, and magic. I don't know. Who's at your table? Some people can separate the artist from their work, the derivative from the source material. For other people, it's personal. The stereotypes aren't 2 steps removed. I would not make it your job to change their perspective. If it was me, and it was the difference between playing with someone that I thought could be a friend or not, then I'd say, okay, do you have any problem with zombies, skeletons, race, ghouls, whites, any undead? Fine. No, pick up some dice and let's play. And I love orcs. Give it green skins, tusks, and a Klingon perspective.
We are Klingons, Worf. We don't embrace other cultures, we conquer them.
And I'm in. Would I think that that person is a brutal tyrant if I met them in real life? Yes, but it's not real life. It's a role-playing game. And if I'm playing, I don't want to play something that thinks and feels the way I do. I want to play a role, something that is different. I play a human in real life. But I'm not every player. Not every player wants to play a role. Some people will just want to sit down, throw some dice, have some fun with friends, not dive too deeply into what makes a monster and what makes a person. And for them, it is nothing more than a skin. Labeling something as a dragon, an aberration, an elemental, or whatever doesn't make it a monster. What makes it a monster is in how it acts, behaves, how it thinks, how you use it as a dungeon master, and how your players perceive that creature. The Illithids are a monster because the Elder Brain is a monster. And the Elder Brain is a monster because from its perspective, from its intelligence level, you are a cow. It doesn't have the context to understand your human existence, and it can puppet around other creatures that Illithids at its will. So it's impossible for the Elder Brain to empathize with a human, dwarf, elf, or beaglekin. So while you're trying to talk to it, explain why your people have some sort of merit and value, it is marshaling psychically a cadre of mind flayers in the next room, and they are going to burst in the moment that the Elder Brain thinks that it has enough to overwhelm you. And if that happens, who's going to stop the Elder Brain from turning the entire kingdom into meat puppets? Maybe it's better to stab it now. Until next time, Dungeon Masters, remember you're a player too. Try to have some fun.